When the exam committee sit down to write the paper, they really think about what verbs they're going to use in the questions. So when you're being asked a question, it's critical that you answer the verb as well as the question itself. You may be asking yourself, what do I mean by the verb? Well, let's look at some of the ones that are often used in food technology. There are 3 verbs that are very often used, and they are describe, discuss, and explain. Of course, other verbs are used, but these ones are very, very often used in food technology. So describe. What does it mean when you describe something? It means that you provide characteristics and features. And one way I get my students to think about that is if they had been attacked in the street, what would they do when they were describing who attacked them to the police officers? They would be giving as much detail about that person as possible so that that person could be identified. So when you're describing something in food technology exams, you need to give the marker enough detail for them to be able to put a picture in their mind of exactly what you're talking about. So an analogy we made in our class was something like a tomato. If I had to describe what a tomato looked like, I might say it was round, red, it could be firm, and all, depending on the tomato, what it looked like. So I might ask my class, could you describe for me what a beautiful fresh tomato looks like? If we apply describe to an HSC question context, this question is in the standards packages that's found on the Board of Studies website. And you can see here the question says, describe factors that contribute to obesity. So the question's not asking someone to describe obesity. What we need to do is describe factors that contribute to obesity. That first sentence there, you can see that the student has attempted to define obesity, and that is fine. It means someone's 20% over their ideal weight. However, they do go on to answer this question correctly, saying things like, obesity results from consuming more kilojoules from food than the body actually needs, and that this energy is converted and stored as fat, and that a person who is obese may have a diet that's high in foods containing sugar and fat, low in fibre, and perhaps high in processed foods, and they also might be the type of person that has a lifestyle that lacks activity. So all of those factors, they are the factors that contribute to obesity, and that is a really good description of how obesity would come about. So it's not describing obesity, but describing the factors. Another HSC verb that's often used in food technology is discuss. And what I like to tell my students is to remember that a discussion is a two-way thing. You don't normally have a discussion all by yourself. If I had to apply discuss to our tomato, so if you remember what a description of a tomato is, if we now had to discuss a tomato, how would that be different? So a student might say a tomato is an example of a fruit because it develops from the flower of a tomato plant. However, on the other hand, it's also considered a vegetable in a culinary sense. So in that respect, we've given 2 points of view about a tomato. So if you compare this now to describe, you can see that when we describe a tomato, it's really about its characteristics and features, whereas discuss is more about giving both sides of the picture. And this is what you need to think about when you're approaching your HSC exam questions for food technology. Another verb that is very often used, not just in food technology, but in all papers, is explain. It's actually, I think, one of the most common verbs used in the HSC. It shows higher order thinking, so it means that people have not just learnt their work, but they can actually apply their work, and this is very important. The term explain, as defined by the Board of Studies, means to relate cause and effect. So that means you need to make relationships between things very evident when you're giving a response in this area. Things that show explain, or so if you were going to write a sentence that showed explain, you would be using joining words such as therefore, or as a result, or leading to, or perhaps as a consequence. So if you're using those terms in your sentence, then you are moving towards an explain. I'll show you what that means. If we look again at a tomato, if I had to explain a tomato, how would that be different to describe? How would that be different to discuss? If I had to explain something to do with a tomato, I might say the tomato is easy to grow, rich in flavour, inexpensive to buy, and as a result of this, it's used extensively in the food industry in a range of processed foods and food products such as pasta sauces. So again, you can see that this is an explanation. It's different to describing tomato, different to discussing a tomato. This is an explanation about tomatoes and how they might be used. So I'm showing that I can apply information about tomatoes to the marker. If I was then going to put this into an actual HSC question context, this is a question that I've used with my students in the past. It's based on an HSC question from a few years ago, and it was worth 5 marks, and I've just tweaked it to suit my students. But essentially the question read, explain the quality control procedures that are required to ensure a safe, high-quality product when canning pears. Now, let's think about those joining words and how we might put that into our response. Again, you need to know your information. You need to know the answers and the quality control procedures here. But a good response might say something like, the raw material specifications would state the colour, size, shape and ripeness of pears to ensure a consistent and high quality end product. So those words there, to ensure, have reminded the person that they need to link it back to the question and show a relationship. Secondly, the syrup added to the pears during canning must have the correct level of ingredients in order to ensure a consistent high quality end product. So you can see again the linking. Have we addressed all of the question though? At this stage, we've only looked at high quality. We haven't really broached safety. So that's part of the question as well, because we have to make sure that our food products are safe. So let's think of an example now that shows safety. So you might say something like, cans must be heated to the correct temperature during processing to destroy microbial activity, resulting in a safe canned product for consumer consumption. So those words there, resulting in, show the link back to the question. We could go on to say during heat processing, cans must be thoroughly sealed, therefore preventing new microorganisms from penetrating the can and causing the pears to spoil, ensuring a safe end product. And finally, during packing cans into shipping boxes, care must be taken to prevent dents in cans, which may allow microorganisms to penetrate the can, leading to an unsafe consumer product. So in that response, for 5 marks, there's explanation, there's linking back to quality control procedures, and there's links back to ensuring a safe, high quality product. Now, I think you'd agree that this is really just very basic food technology information, but what you're not doing is you're not just describing quality control procedures, you're explaining them because you're actually linking them back to safety and high quality end products.